Hello, it's Joey and today I'm making pockets, fun and easy ones for a journal. I'm using pages from a notebook and some lovely old book pages. Each pocket has an image on the front, one is stamped and one is hand drawn. I'm having fun with pencils and paint today, colouring them in. I've sewn around them for texture, but you could just use glue. They're super easy for you to make, but curiously satisfying too. I'll share my design ideas and tips as we go, so hit the subscribe button below and let's make 2 easy pockets. The key supplies that I'm using today are an old notebook, and I'm using a page from an A4 notebook. This has pretty poor quality paper and it's been used, so it's been scribbled on, and that's absolutely fine. And this is what I'm going to use to make the back of the pocket, so the body of the pocket. On the front of each of these pockets you can see an image, and these have been stamped or hand drawn and painted using a page from a really old book. And I have a collection of these Charles Dickens books. They date from around 1890 and they are falling to bits. They were falling to bits when I got them. They're absolutely gorgeous and I just love them. As I tear pages out I get these beautiful classic images, and I've got to do something special with each of those. But I'm going to have a page from this and I will stamp or hand draw and paint on it. But don't worry, the drawing and painting is not only easy but relatively addictive, so you might want to make a few of these pockets. The stamp I'm using today, I chose a botanical one. This is a lily I've used quite a few times. In fact, it's an image I've used in a journal I created quite a long time ago, one of my probably quite typical Joey journals with lots of different size papers in. And I didn't film making this spread, and I thought I would do something with the same image but making one of my other favourite projects, which is a pocket. So I'm using that today. I think a botanical image works quite well on the front of these pockets, but just choose whatever you have, and we're going to colour that with paint or pencils. So the pencils I'm using today come from a set that sits on my desk. So I have a set of 48. These are watercolour pencils from Arteza, so a great range of colours. There's never really a shade that I don't have in this tub, and they're quite creamy in their consistency, so very, very easy to use. And I found from experimentation that these are the best things to use when I draw and colour in the tub at the bottom of this cactus, so I'll show you how to do that. And I'm also going to add a few little extras, so I do sew around this and add a sentiment and a little label, but really pull out anything you have. These little extras, like the paper on the side, which I've punched with this fluted edge punch. You could use anything, or you could even just rip paper, something to add a little bit of flash of colour and texture. Let's get on and make the body of the pocket, and then we can go on to the fun of the decorating and the embellishment. So starting with the notebook page, I'm simply going to fold it over lengthwise, and it's even got these little holy pieces, this tattered edge from where I pulled it out of the spine, the metal spine, the curly thing on the edge of your book, and I'm leaving that in. I think for pockets sometimes that can just feel really nice. And I'm going to layer on top half of my lovely book page, and we can already see the contrast, how we're going to use this very modern, almost bleached white paper as the basis, and then add onto the top a piece from this very vintage 1890s book page. So I'm going to get 2 pockets out of a single page, and for that I need to just tear this in half. And the dimensions that roughly work are that when you've torn this in half, and I'm turning it on its side, so it would have been like that. I've torn it in half, I'll rotate it. The width that I have then is just a little bit less than the width of this folded piece of paper. Now it doesn't matter if your book page is even smaller. This doesn't come quite to the edge. I think that's absolutely fine. And I'm going to glue this piece on top, and I like to have the ratty-tatty fluted edge where I've torn it out of the book at the bottom. That's just a personal preference. When I look at these pieces of paper, I always think, which side do I want to have facing up? Most of the time there is a preferred side, and I'm taking a glue stick rather than a liquid glue for this, so that I limit the amount of undulations and difficult tattiness that can appear when you use a wetter glue. So I'm going to add that to the top of this folded piece, and while I'm at it, I'm going to take my second piece and add that on as well. And isn't this super easy to create the body of a pocket this way? I'm almost embarrassed to share these pockets with you because they're just so ridiculously easy. But the mode I'm in at the moment is do what makes us abundantly happy and calm, and indeed using our art and craft to reduce any of that stress and anxiety. I think that's a really, really valuable outcome that I get from my journaling and crafting, and I do wonder who else uses their craft to sort of feel a bit calmer, feel better about life, particularly at the moment. So I'm taking my scissors, probably easier than a trimmer, and I'm just cutting so that I have a tiny extra bit of white at the top. In fact, I'm going to reduce that, that's rather too much still. What I like to have around the book page is almost the same amount sticking out at the left and the top, but nothing's precise in my world. So, second piece, let's just trim that down. And even this little bit with scribbles on will go in my little box for perhaps some sort of collage at a later date. So now I've got two pocket bases, yes, with tatty scribbles and nice paper behind, and we're ready to do a little bit of decoration. So I'll stamp one and I'll colour one, and we'll do slightly different decorating on each of them. I thought I'd use my pigment ink stamp pad today, so this is in a gloriously deep black. And although when I do quite a lot of my crafting, I like the vintage browns. So for example, when I've been making my little index cards, I've used these lovely Adirondack ink pads. I've got one in oregano and one in ginger. But I've found that because I'm going to paint this lovely flower, the pad that works best and the colour that works best is black. And one of the reasons for that is it needs to show quite clearly as we stamp onto the old book page. So to make life easy for ourselves, we want a crisp and clear image to paint. So for this project, for this pocket, I'm using a darker colour than I might otherwise use. So there we've just done a stamp. I don't know if you can see how clear it is. It's not too thick, the lines are not too thick, and I like to find a stamp that's got quite delicate lines, but they do need to be crisp and clear every time we stamp. And all I'm going to do with this now is have a little bit of a play, and I thought I'd just pull out some paints that I haven't used for a while. But use anything you have, use watercolours, use your pencils, use your watercolour pencils, whatever works for you. I'm just going to pull out some fresh green and yellow colours and get those onto the flower. I have my water, and I have a rather mucky water brush here, but it has quite a fine nib, and it's one that I find easy to control. So I'm going to play with some greens in the lid, fill in the stems and the leaves, and work up to the flowers at the top, and then I'll add a little bit of grass at the bottom so it's got something to sit in. I'm I'm using a very, very dilute wash to colour in with a pale yellow on the petals, and the reason I do that is because the stamp has given me a few little dots and lines, the shape and the features of the petals in the stamp, and I want those to show through. And I'm also going to add just a little bit of warmth of orange on the lower parts down here, but I do want the colour to be quite pale, and I think on this particular design, because it's more of a vintage feel, less is more. I like it to feel like it's sitting in grass, sitting on some sort of base. Okay, there's too much blue in that green, so I'm going to take it down with a little bit of red and then add maybe a little bit of yellow just to bring it back to that vintage colour. Gorgeous. And just flicking a bit, add a few lines, scribble a bit to the side, keeping my brush slightly off the paper at times so it's not flat, and that gives me gaps as I scribble across, and there we are, we've got a really easily coloured flower. So what I'll do now is add some of the embellishments. We'll add the fluted extra piece on the side and maybe a sentiment and some texture, and then I'll sew around it. So I'll start by adding this little fluted piece of paper on the side, and that is nothing more than a strip of scrapbook paper that I've punched. So I've got it in a more bluey green here with large dots, and I've also punched it in a very pale lime green, and I feel that for this very Victorian style flower image, this paler one is perfect. So I'm going to take my front page up and just get a bit of glue on here and stick it on the back side of the pocket. So glue on. The strip that I punched is about an inch or so wide, so really about 2.5 centimetres, just to give me enough width to stick that down on the back of the pocket. And the tip that I have for you at this stage is don't press it down completely, turn this back and just assess how much is sticking out to the right. And I think the key for this particular extra on the pocket is to have not too much sticking out. We want it to feel delicate. So I might even bring that in a little bit so I can lift it and just go a little bit further. And I think that works really well. So I've just got a small amount sticking out. I'll just even it up, and that's about fine. So I'll press that down at that point and just cut off the extra. So far so good and super easy. Now that I've put this little back extra piece on, I'm going to add something down here with words on. So I've chosen a few sentiments that I've cut out of some Tracy Fox labels, these ubiquitous labels that appear on so many projects. I like the ones with the little cut off corner, they're particularly nice, and they have less, let's find one, they have less of this bold dark brown. So I feel that that is complementary to the rest of the design on the flower, and I'm going to stick that on so that it just overlaps the right hand side of the edge of the pocket. So we're talking about layers now, we're talking about adding those extras in a way that makes it really interesting for the eye and appealing and pretty, and that's what we're looking for today. So I'm going to put a label down there on the right, keeping it as neat and tidy as I can, which is novel for me. And I've just got something there now which is slightly overlapping the edge of the pocket, possibly easier to see on one that I've finished here. So this one is just overlapping the edge of the pocket. And I also want a sentiment, and I decided at the top left was a good place to put it. So I have some cut out here of various Artie May's sentiments, and I really like the bold black. So again, I think that works very well with the vintage style book page. For this size of pocket, I feel that these are a bit too big. I've got some bigger ones that are going to go on the cactus that I'll show you how to do in a minute. So let me find some smaller ones. So I've found everything is possible in a nice small print, and I want to put that up here, and I want to add some texture. So I'm going to find just a little bit of material, which is for me an old curtain that I've dyed. I'm going to stick that on behind it. So nothing more than an old kitchen curtain. It's quite tough stuff, but I like the ridges, I like the squares. Let's just take a piece of that and stick it on. So I need it to be as long as this little sentiment. Trim it down. So it's not super accurate, but it's enough. And I think for this to get the piece of paper, the sentiment to stick, I probably need to use my liquid glue. And that can go on top of my little piece of fabric. And then all of that can go at the top left. And I'm going to place it, putting some glue down, so that when I go around this pocket with sewing, I'm not going to totally sew through the sentiment, but hopefully I will pick up just a little bit of the fabric and therefore help it to attach, because it isn't easy to keep these little sentiments on top of fabric sticking down on top of a pocket. So it's as easy as that. All I need to do now is sew around it and then do a tiny bit of stamping. So I'm going to do running stitch, zigzag. I do a little bit of back and forward at the top to give it some strength, and I'll do a little bit of stamping at the end. But just before I do that, let's make the other pocket, and then I can do the sewing of both of them together. So on the second pocket, I'm going to draw and colour in this zebra cactus. It's unbelievably easy, and actually you can whiz off a few of these very quickly. It's one that I put in another journal, and I haven't done one for quite some time. In fact, it's probably right at the beginning of my YouTube journey I made up this journal, and I drew this little doodle, a zebra cactus, and I really enjoyed doing it. So I just thought I would replicate that today and show you how. And then it gives us something to colour in and add some extras to. And it's colourful, isn't it? It's green and more luscious, and I felt like it was something that I wanted at this time. So I'm starting with a pen. I'm going to draw in pen. It's so easy, I don't feel the need to do it in pencil first and go over it. I'm going to draw the pot and then the leaves, so let's go for it. I'm thinking about drawing the pot so that it fills about 1/3 of the space that we have on the front. So just to give yourself a little bit of a clue to get your proportions right, think about this pot finishing as about 1/3 of the size of your page. I'll have a slopey line, and I'll have another slopey line, and I can guarantee you that they're not completely symmetrical. I'm going to join them up at the bottom to give my pot a base, and I'm just going to give this a little bit of a curved line at the top. And all I'm going to do is divide it with some lines that are far enough apart that when we come to colour it, the colouring will be relatively easy. And you might end up with about, I don't know, 5 or 6 or 7 lines across. And that's our pot done. I'm now going to do the leaves, and I'll start with the big one at the front, and then I'll add these others around it. So one big leaf, be bold, be confident, give yourself a big leaf in the middle. I think I'll add a pointy one to the right, bring that down, and I'm going to have another largish one to the left. That gives us the structure, and then we're just going to add a few little bits, a few smaller leaves in the spaces, as easy as that. So I had 2 to the right and 1 to the left. I'll have a couple of little bits down here and a couple down there. And that gives us a pot and a plant that we can colour in. I've tried using real brush pens, so a different form of medium to colour this in. I tried using paint, and I went back to the easy peasy method of using a couple of colours of these pencils. So I've chosen one with a little bit of red in it, which I think is that one, and one with a deeper orange, just to alternate. And I'm going to put the colour quite firmly. I've got a hard table underneath, there's no protection underneath this pocket, so there's nothing resisting or soft. Pressing down quite hard, getting quite a lot of the pigment on, but I'm not taking the pigment all the way to the middle of the pot. So what I'm endeavouring to do is leave the centre of the pot, so this area here, with just a little bit less pigment to give us a bit more of that sense of the pot being rounded. And just having fun colouring in with my two shades. Choose whatever shade you like, whatever your whim is. At the moment you pick up your pencils or your paints. These colours seem to work quite well with the greenery, with the leaves. I think they're quite happy colours. And we'll go with lots of different things in a journal as well, so it's not like I'm using blues and purples. The shades I'm using are Garnet and a well-used one, Orange, and just make sure I've got plenty of pigment but not quite to the middle. So everyone can do this. If I can do it, everyone can do it. It's just very relaxing getting those pencils out and playing. Go back to my water, and I'm just going to let that watercolour pencil leak. So I'll go across the browny colour first, drag the pigment across, so it's not quite even, it's a bit paler, there's a bit less of the pigment in the centre. Voila. Then I'll do the same with the orange. Drag that across, so the edges are not severe where with the colour finishes. And then I find if I just merge the whole thing a little bit, it brings it together. So there's our pot. Then I'm just going to use my greens again and have fun colouring in my leaves. I'm taking slightly different shades of green so that where the leaves meet there's a little bit of differentiation. I'm going to add some lines, the zebra cross hatching, shortly when the paint has dried, and that will also help us delineate each of the leaves and just give it an extra feature. And one of the magical features of painting on book pages is that when you have finished and the paint has dried, and in particular when it's dry and it goes just a little bit more see-through, you still get to see the words, and I just think it gives such a gorgeous effect. And just like we did with the lily, I'm going to give this a bit of a base, just a little bit of something so that the pot isn't dangling in Nowheresville. So scribbly underneath, a little bit more where the pot is, I'll go behind it a bit, and then I'll take a slightly darker shade of green, maybe bring that more to a less blue colour, and I'll just flick a bit, end of the brush, give it some grass there, and it just makes it feel a bit more natural. So I just need this to dry and then I can add the zebra hatching, and in the meantime what I'll do is add my sentiment and my label and my fluty side. So for this one I think I'll use my slightly bluer green, and that picks up some of the shades in the leaves. It's bolder, slightly more modern. And again positioning so that there's not too much of it sticking out, maybe about there. Yeah, that's about right. So it's going to go for about 1/2 centimetre sticking out of the side. And then this one, particularly as I'm going to have this cross hatching in black on the leaves, I felt like a larger bold sentiment would work really well. Follow your dreams, I think that can sit down there. And positioning on this one again so that when I sew around it I'm not going to have the stitches completely going through the centre of the sentiment. So just a little tip about where you position your sentiment. And I like upright. It doesn't need to be up here. It doesn't need to be horizontal all the time. And to bring it together, I'm going to add a bit more colour from the two pencils. So again, you could use your paints just around the sentiment. So it's a little bit lonely here on the bottom right. Let's bring it into the story of the pocket and the design and the pattern and the colours that we've been using. Let's just give it some of that pigment. So I could have matted this onto paper and that will be achieving a similar effect. I'm just using a couple of those colours, the same pencils, going around it to give it some shading, and I'll just distribute that pigment from the pencils with a little bit of water. These pencils are particularly easy to use when the paper's already wet. So if you're finding you want to go a bit faster, or you find you want a bit more pigment, let the paper be wet and then add your colour. So all I need to do now with this and the other one is run around them with a sewing machine, and then Bob's your uncle. We have a couple of pockets. So let me just set that up and show you how I do it. So I'm going to sew around them. I'll start at the top right and just move around, and I'll add a little bit of zigzag on the bottom half down here, running through the label that we added. Speaking of which, just before I sew the cactus doodle pocket, I'll just show you that I've added a label to this one as well, and on this one I've added it from the inside. So half of it is covered up and it tucks behind the strong, bold, larger black sentiment, whereas this one, I wanted to see the whole of it because my sentiment is up here, so I kind of have a bit more space for it. So on this, the design is just a little bit different, accommodating the strength of the sentiment down here. So I'll get on with the sewing, and then I'll finish off with a little bit of stamping, a little bit of final decoration. Round the corner. That's number one. Zigzag down here. And on this one, you can see that the zigzag has gone just through the label, and I think that really helps us to see the beauty of the pattern and the thread. So to add the important final extras, I will add little cross hatchings onto the leaves of this cactus, and they're just scratchy little lines that go horizontally across each of the leaves. So nothing too difficult there, and really, really quick. I'm taking the same pen I used before, which is nothing more than a Staples pen, and because the paint has dried, it's just really easy to put those lines on, and I'm not even worried if they don't go absolutely to the edge of the leaf. There's something about doing it partially and quickly which makes it, I think, more realistic. Don't be heavy-handed, keep your hand light, and it's this that I think adds a real extra, just something a little bit special to our design. So that's the cactus doodle done. For this beautiful little lily, I just want to add a bit of vintage style stamping. So this time I will use my little Adirondack ginger coloured ink, and I want the lightest of impressions just down here on the right, and then you can see I put my acrylic on both sides. I'm a little bit short of the acrylic blocks. I'll have a little bit of that there. And these are my super easy pockets, two little pockets for an art or a junk journal. I've been really enjoying collage recently, and I'm on a bit of a roll. So I'm going to be filming how I make this textured heart. I've also made a grungy pocket, and I've also had a go at turning some ugly cardstock, so very white handmade index card shape, into some vintage style little postcards. I've had a lot of fun making those using mica, using chalks and stamps. So hit the subscribe button and come back and see me to watch that, and give me a thumbs up if you've enjoyed this, because that really does help me. I hope you've enjoyed seeing me make my pockets. Let me know if you make some. I hope to see you soon.